There's a new PS5 update, but how good is it? Guys, what was even going on with that state of play? Both Dying Light and Dying Light 2 got next-gen updates. And are people getting PS Now for free? Let's find out in today's edition of PlayStation News. Alright, so we've been looking forward to this state of play for months now. It literally just happened, and when it started up, I could not have been more excited. And about halfway through, I realized there were about 7 minutes left in the whole thing, and I was like, man, they are not going to announce very many cool games today, are they? Now look, I don't want to rain on your parade. If you like what was announced, that is definitely great and awesome, but the issue is there were tons of leaks leading up to this that got people really excited for some games that just were nowhere to be seen. One of those games was Hogwarts Legacy. Obviously, people want to hear a lot about that game just because it was delayed and it's been so long since we've heard about it. Another one was a remake of a high-profile PlayStation game. I know there were a ton of rumors that Sly Cooper was going to be announced because the website for the Sly Cooper franchise got updated right before this state of play. Like, why would you go through the trouble of updating the Sly Cooper website if you're not going to announce anything related to Sly Cooper? What the hell, Sony? We were also supposedly going to see something from Infamous, and instead what we got is, to be fair, a bunch of new game announcements. And if you are a fan of anime, Japanese style games, this was definitely the state of play for you because you got a ton of representation here, especially from Square Enix. But if you're into more Western style games, more AAA type stuff, Sony definitely left you hanging. There were a couple cool things though, so I will go over those in just a second. First of all, I like that they showed a launch trailer for Ghostwire Tokyo. This game's coming out on March 25th. I'm honestly surprised we even got this trailer because this is a game that's essentially going to make Microsoft a ton of money if people buy it, even though it is a console exclusive on the PS5. Microsoft bought Bethesda, who owns Tango Gameworks, last year, so it's technically a Microsoft property. So if Sony put a ton of marketing behind Ghostwire Tokyo and it made a ton of money on the PS5, it would be making a lot of money for Microsoft, and I don't think they really want to do that. Either way, the game looks really cool. I like that it's in first person. The graphics actually look great. I'm kind of curious how open world this game's going to be, or if it's going to be more linear. I really liked how they handled the open world stuff in The Evil Within 2. It's the same developer, Tango Gameworks. It had a bit of a hub world, right? That was this little small town. Of course, it was inside someone's mind, so it would break down the more and more you came back to it. But it was a really cool meta area where you could explore and get upgrades and take down enemies, and I really enjoyed it. So if this game's building off of that idea where you have a hub world and then the main levels are kind of offshoots of that hub world, I think that'd be cool. And we've seen Bethesda do similar things like that before with Doom Eternal more recently. So I feel like that's kind of how this game's going to be set up. Either way, I'm really excited to check this out March 25th. A game that I was kind of losing hope for it being good is Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origins. I'm just really interested in this game because it's taking this cool sort of modernized look of art style from Final Fantasy 15 and then the story of Final Fantasy 1 and then the gameplay of Dark Souls, or more probably Jedi Fallen Order, where it's going to be a little bit easier, and mashing it all together. Now there was a demo when this game was announced during E3, and I remember that demo being technically rough, but people were liking everything that I just talked about, like the gameplay and the art style and just how overall the game was kind of coming together. So now we're getting a new demo today on the PS5. I'm actually excited to go home and play that just leading up to this March 18th release date. I just feel like that's going to be the deciding factor for how excited I allow myself to get for this game. Man, I would not be releasing a Souls-like right now. We just saw Square Enix, who's ironically also releasing this game, eat dirt massively with Babylon's Fall. I know that was a game where they were like, just finish it and get it out. Let's just get it over and done with. But they released that at the exact same time as Elden Ring, and that was a huge mistake. So I feel like March 18th is still way too close to Elden Ring. I would wait at least a couple more months because this summer is not stacked at all with game release dates. This new Forspoken trailer was actually pretty cool. I was talking to my friend Jake Baldino from GameRanks on Discord this whole time during the state of play, and that's the one where you're both like, this is the first trailer from this game that made us say, whoa, that's kind of interesting, and that's how I felt coming out of it. So yeah, I can see why Square Enix delayed this game. It's actually shaping up to look pretty cool. Gundam Evolution was announced a long time ago, but this is the first time I've personally seen gameplay, and it looks like Gundam Overwatch, which I'm into. I don't really know anything about all the different Gundam anime, but I do like the art style and I like all the robots. I know I watched one Gundam show and there was another one where there was like CGI and they had big heads. I didn't really like that one all that much, but yeah, I think the Gunpla stuff is cool where you build the model kit, so I'll probably check this out because I'm assuming it's free to play. Trek to Yomi was another standout. This one's coming from Devolver Digital, who's one of my favorite publishers. I also saw People Can Fly are helping out with the development of it. It sort of has the same vibe as Sifu, which just came out from Devolver, and they also just released Shadow Warrior 3, free on PS Now. So I'm glad that they're going with more Eastern themed games. I think that's kind of cool, and it seems to be working for them. That game was definitely a standout. And then finally, Returnal is getting a big update on March 22nd called Returnal Ascension. This is adding both co-op and a new survival mode to the game that both look really fun. I also saw a few jokes on Twitter right after the event that this game, Returnal, is getting co-op before Halo Infinite, and that is a crazy thought, right? Like, I never even thought Returnal would get co-op, and I just assumed Halo would have it at launch, but here we are. The big PS5 exclusive Returnal has co-op in its campaign before Halo. That's kind of crazy. And then finally, I gotta call attention to this first game, right? I saw the Capcom logo, I saw dinosaurs, and I just assumed it was going to be Dino Crisis because, you know, Capcom has a franchise with dinosaurs in it called Dino Crisis where you shoot dinosaurs. And I was like, oh, I hope this isn't Dino Crisis, because I was really hoping that would be more like the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes or Resident Evil Village. And I'm kind of glad this is not Dino Crisis. The game was actually called Exoprimal, which, yeah, it looked like, I don't know, Warframe mixed with Left 4 Dead. It just didn't really hook me all that much. Second Extinction already exists over from Avalanche Studios. Let's get Dino Crisis as people want it to come out. That's what I want, Capcom. I think you guys can do it. Now, I'm sure there's a big group of people out there who think this is the best state of play ever. All these games probably struck with one type of fandom. Me personally, this was mid at best and overall pretty disappointing. I know you're supposed to take leaks with a huge grain of salt, but we need to know some release dates for games that are coming out later this year, like Hogwarts Legacy or God of War Ragnarok. That's what gets people excited, having a date on a game that you can look forward to, so as you get closer to it, the hype builds up. I know they still have plenty of opportunity throughout this year to announce some of these release dates, but why are you doing a state of play if you don't have really anything crazy first party to show off? Like, yeah, looking at all the games that were talked about at this state of play, the only one that can really be considered a full-on first party update at this point because they own Housemarque is the Returnal update. Yeah, Forspoken's going to be a console exclusive, but I think that's definitely going to be a timed exclusive, and everything else was pretty much third party. So as far as I'm concerned, this was kind of a weak state of play, and I really hope Sony kind of goes back to the drawing board on these, because no matter what, it's hard to manage expectations. If Sony themselves is doing a show where they're showing off new games, right, you want to see a lot of AAA representation from the first party. I would much rather have less of these throughout the year if they could figure out how to hammer down and just show off Sony first party games, because there's plenty of other shows throughout the year where you can see all this third party and smaller type stuff. But yeah, if any of these games stood out to you, I'd love to hear about it down in the comments. And also make sure you're subscribed just in case they do a state of play that's worth talking about, because you're going to want to have notifications on so you can hear about it right when it's announced and actually hear if it was good after. All right, so Dying Light 2 came out about a month ago, and I gotta give Techland credit here for how hard they've been working at patching these games. Of course, the game should not have released in the buggy state it was in, but I'm glad they're not abandoning the product and just letting it sit there. I know some of the big issues people have is that there's extreme fog in the end game after you beat the game that's hard to see through. There was issues where there was a death loop bug and they had to fix individual mission checkpoints to make sure you weren't respawning outside of a checkpoint, which is what caused it. They've added in more graphics options. They've added in a ton of stuff, including DLC costumes and weapons and everything like that. There's still some stuff to be fixed and still some bugs and just overall performance that I think they could iron out, but they said they're going to support this game for like 6 years, so I think they've got a little bit of time. But while people wait for more and more patches to come to the game, I've seen a lot of fans going back to the first Dying Light game and checking that out, and that's going to be a cooler experience now because it's getting a next-gen update on both the PS5 and the PS4 Pro. The PS4 Pro upgrade isn't anything too crazy, it just has an improved 30 frames per second cap, and they've updated the netcode to make co-op run a whole lot smoother. Hopefully that works. I know sometimes games do co-op upgrades and they actually make the game worse, but if they're making a point out of telling people, I just hope they've tested this out. So if you're on PS4 Pro, maybe go check out the multiplayer and see if the frame rate is a little more consistent. On PS5, you're getting a locked 60 frames per second performance mode at 1080p. I would really like to see that be bumped up to 1440p because I just went back to play the first Dying Light on PC and you could run that game at like 400 or 500 frames per second easy on like a laptop 3080. So I'm pretty confident the PS5 could run at 60 frames per second at a higher resolution. resolution. That's just me though. So while this update is a little bit underwhelming, I think it's better overall than what the game was running at before, and it's cool to see a game that's over 7 years old get this update for the PS5 because people are still going back and playing this game and they really like it. There's been a ton of DLC added since it came out. There's a full expansion called The Following, so if you haven't checked out Dying Light since it came out about 7 years ago, maybe go give it another look because you could probably get a box copy for like $3 at this point. Okay, so speaking of Sony not announcing stuff we know is coming, we know that Project Spartacus is basically ready to go in the background. Like, we already know the pricing tiers that this thing is allegedly going to use thanks to Jeff Grubb, who actually is pretty spot on with his leaks. And yeah, people I've seen are not exactly stoked about those three pricing options. You've got a $10 one, which is essentially PS Plus as it is right now with a few extra add-ons. You've got a $13 one, which gives you a few more features, and then you've got the $16 one, which gives you literally everything. You get PlayStation Plus, PlayStation Now, a full library of older games that's sort of akin to the PlayStation Plus collection, and then finally you're going to get access to older games like PS3 games, and that's going to be the highest tier, $1 more than Game Pass Ultimate. On top of that, we've also seen PS3 games actually showing up on the PlayStation 5's PlayStation Store, which that's kind of crazy because they don't show up on the PlayStation 4's PlayStation Store. So yeah, Sony's obviously adding in functionality on the PS5 to be able to display and purchase PS3 games. And now things are getting even crazier because fans are reporting that this month when the PS Plus games launched for March, they also realized that they ended up getting a free subscription to PS Now that they're able to use to download some of the PS4 games and play them on their machine, which is cool because Shadow Warrior 3 just came out on PS Now and that game got pretty good reviews. It definitely walked back the procedurally generated big open levels and looter shooter elements of Shadow Warrior 2 and kind of became its own version of Doom Eternal, and it is super fun. So you should definitely check out your PlayStation account and see if you have access to PlayStation Now without paying for it, because that game came out day one. It's a $50 game that you'll be able to play as long as Sony's allowing you to use this PlayStation Now for free. And another reason that's so interesting is because one of the tiers, as I mentioned, that we're supposedly getting with Project Spartacus gives you both PlayStation Now and PlayStation Plus. So if Sony's in the background putting all the stuff in place that makes it so people who are already paying for PS Plus or have a year pay it out or whatever are going to get upgraded to also have the new version of PS Now included as well, that's a good update that I didn't expect Sony to do. The other thing I really want to hear from them still, other than an announcement about this whole service to begin with, because we're supposed to hear about it this month, is whether or not they're going to allow you to download the PS3 games you already purchased. You guys have heard me talk about this a lot. I own a lot of digital PS3 games. I just don't think I should have to subscribe to a service to get access to those, especially if they are showing up to be able to be purchased individually on the PlayStation Store already. So if Sony's going to give me the option to buy them a la carte versus subscribing to a service, I hope they can figure out how to make sure they track what games I already purchased from them digitally 2 generations ago and let me download those like Xbox does. Like, you can get even crazier with the Xbox and just take an Xbox 360 or original Xbox disc and put it right in your Xbox Series X and it'll download the right version of that game. Of course, you have to put the disc in to like do the authentication check, but you'll be able to play the backwards compatible title. I need Sony to look at that system, realize how good it works, and just one-to-one copy it, because if you look at both generations, I like the Sony exclusives way more than I like the Xbox 360 exclusives. But yeah, there's definitely got to be something coming with this whole Project Spartacus thing. There's way too much smoke for there not to be fire. And you can look at this next story however you want, but in my opinion, it also ties into this whole Project Spartacus thing because Sony's put out a new hotfix firmware update for the PS5. It has a long string of numbers that I cannot remember. It's a very small update, and honestly, if your PS5 is in rest mode, it might update itself in the background, which I think is actually pretty cool that that's even a feature. This is not the big update we've been waiting for that features full native 1440p support, variable refresh rate, and all these other things that would really help out with specifically Elden Ring. I know on Xbox right now, for when that game drops below 60 frames per second, because the Xbox Series X is able to support variable refresh rate, you don't see screen tearing and you barely notice the frame drops. On the PS5, the best way to play the game right now is to run the PS4 version, but PlayStation 5 definitely has the edge overall because the PS5 version, while it does run at 60 frames per second, just has a lot of pop-in. The PS4 version has less pop-in and worse effects, but it runs at a locked 60 frames per second. On the Xbox, your best bet is to play with variable refresh rate, because if you download the old version, like the Xbox One version of Elden Ring, and run that, it does not run as well as the PS4 version does on the PS5. So yeah, this game's coming in hot. It's running running a little rough, and I would like to see Sony introduce variable refresh rate so we can get more games running without screen tearing. I'm having major screen tearing issues on my PS5 with Far Cry 6. I ended up getting that game on both PC and PS5 because of the cross-save feature, and yeah, I don't like the screen tearing, and if the PS5 had variable refresh rate, it wouldn't even be an issue. What I really hope here is that between Project Spartacus and all these big features that are still missing from the PS5, Sony is just working on some mega firmware update. I know with Project Spartacus, a lot of this stuff could be handled on the back end, but with the PS5, the PlayStation Store is its own native app finally. It's no longer running in a web browser on the console. It's its own app store on the device. So knowing that, I think you need to do at least some sort of a firmware update to even launch that. So if Sony can come out and say, look guys, we've not only got emulation for PS3 games working, we also are updating PlayStation Plus to be a 3-tiered service that has a whole game library, and we're also adding 1440p support and variable refresh rate. This really is the ultimate console. Then there's a lot of reasons to be excited about a PS5. And going back to that first state of play being mid-story, they really got to have a whole showcase, right? They got to show us some new games coming in the future, maybe give us a gameplay update on Spider-Man 2, show us some stuff we've never seen before, and really make an event out of it, because Xbox, ever since they bought Activision, they've disappeared into thin air. They have not announced anything, they don't talk about anything. Their March console update is just basically like a bunch of features they released individually for beta testers, and they're packing it all together. Now is the time to strike, Sony. Give us some release dates, give us some new games, give us something to be excited for at the end of the year.